Hi, hello. Welcome to the Rhetorical Reader. I am Michael, and I'm really happy to be here. I want to talk about all of the books that I read in August. So, I read 5 novels in August. I read 1 nonfiction book. I had 1 DNF, and I also read some comics and gaming related stuff that I'll talk a little bit about in the end. So, I feel like as I've been getting back into reading, that 6 novels with some ancillary stuff has been a good pace for me, and I am pretty happy with that overall. And for me, again, getting back into reading just this year, really hardcore, I think that quality is a lot more important to me right now than quantity. And that is my segue to talk about my DNF. And my DNF this month is a book called Lamia by Tristan Travis. I know I'm getting some glare on that. I stumbled across this book when I was doing some research about Lamia myths for another creative project that I wanted to work on. But this is a detective fiction novel that was published in 1982, and it is a story about a series of crimes which seems like they're being committed by this mythological creature. And it has this kind of but she only kills bad men vibe. And I was interested. I thought it might be good. But do not be fooled. It is terrible. The characters are really broadly and badly written caricatures of people. In the first 12 pages alone, we got homophobia, racism, misogyny, and a casual drop of the N-word. And none of those things were in service of writing a better story or telling a better tale. They are there in a way that feels like they're just there because they can be. And honestly, that made me really uncomfortable. So I quit out of this book pretty quickly. I don't recommend it. That is Lamia by Tristan Travis. But I promise it gets much better from here. So the next book that I read is Dungeons and Drama by Christy Boyce, and this was really great. So this is a fake dating high school romance, and our main character is a girl named Riley. She is a musical theater obsessed high school junior, and she gets into some very teenager trouble, and her punishment for that is that she has to work in her father's gaming store for 2 months. And when she gets there, she meets Nathan, who is another junior in her school, and he is the very nerdy gamer boy who also works at her father's store. And after a fairly rough introduction, they make a fake dating pact to both get something they want, and we all know how that turns out. So, as someone who was a weird gamer boy in high school, I loved this. Overall, I described this novel when I was talking to my wife about it as a Disney Channel original movie from the era of like Cowbells or High School Musical, but in book form. It's adorable, it's easy to read, it's fun, it has some cool gaming moments in it. 4 out of 5 stars. Dungeons and Drama by Christy Boyce. The next book that I read is The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner. I'm getting so much glare today. It's probably when I chose to film. But this is a supernatural mystery that is set in London in 1873. And we follow 2 viewpoint characters in the story, Lena Wicks and Mr. Morley. And Lena is a scientifically minded young woman who has apprenticed herself to this famous medium and spiritualist named Vaudeline de Lair. She's done this because she hopes to solve the mystery of her sister's murder. And Mr. Morley has hired Vaudeline to run a seance because he's hoping to find the murderer of the society's founder. And the thing that ties this all together is that both of these murders happened on the same night. And so from that point, You get a compelling adventure mystery, and you get clues unearthed. Everything gets laid bare. There's a little bit of a sapphic romance in the book, but that is secondary to the plot. This book is very much plot driven. I did really enjoy it, and the one thing that I will say bothered me a little bit about it is that the two viewpoint characters, Lena and Mr. Morley, their chapters were written in very different ways. Because Lena's viewpoint chapters are written in the third person, but then Mr. Morley's viewpoint chapters, for some reason, are written in the first person. And I think I understand the thought process behind that decision, but it was very noticeable while I was reading the book, and I did find it jarring sometimes during the reading. I caught myself thinking about the viewpoints rather than reading the story. All of that said, Lena's a really great character. I really enjoyed spending time in this world, in this story. It was compelling enough that I often found myself staying up late to read just one more chapter. So even with some of its weaknesses, this is still, for me, a 4 out of 5 stars. The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner. Highly recommend. So for my nonfiction this month, I read The Internet Con by Cory Doctorow, and this is fully titled The Internet Con: How to Seize the Means of Computation. And this is a exploration of how big tech creates these really elaborate sort of walled gardens around their online products, and how they create very high switching costs for us as consumers, and how this affects us not just as consumers, but also how it affects us as a society. And so I think that the arguments are very well presented. I think that Doctorow is very knowledgeable and passionate about his topic. And I do think that these are very much real problems in need of real solutions. And he offers some in this book. And I think those are important to discuss. But I also think that in the current political climate, these are going to be incredibly difficult to ever see come to fruition, because much of his solutions are dependent on governments regulating big tech in ways that they just haven't seemed willing to do so. And so it's an eye-opening book. It's fascinating. It's a very slim volume. You'll get through it quickly. And I think it's worth a read if these sorts of things interest you or if you're concerned about them. But yes, 4 out of 5 stars for me. The Internet Con by Cory Doctorow. It's an important little book. The next thing that I read this month, I continued reading the Wayfarers series with the third book, Record of a Spaceborne Few by Becky Chambers. And I read the first 2 of these earlier this summer, and I'm currently reading the last one. So this has been a wonderful series. I'm so glad that I finally got around to it. I've just loved all 3 of these that I've read so far. And this third book follows a group of people who are living on the Exodin fleet. And that is the group of ships that humanity used to escape from Earth when the planet became unlivable due to their own actions. And this story follows, and I'm going to look at my notes for this because I want to make sure I get this right. This follows various characters who are an archivist who is one of the people who keeps the history of humanity and the history of the fleet, a caretaker who is someone who works with the dead. And as you might imagine, in a self-sustaining ecosystem that exists on spaceships and not on a planet, that job is quite complicated and quite important to the fleet. It follows a woman who is a warehouse worker and a mother, and her being a mother is important to the story because even though her daughter is not one of the viewpoint characters in the story, something that her daughter encountered and her daughter's emotions are something that are very important to the story. The story also follows a teenager who is rebelling against life in the fleet, and then a young man who was born outside of the fleet but has decided to come home to it and learn more about what it means to be a human in this galactic society that they live in. So we meet all of these characters 5 years after a really significant tragedy has struck the fleet, and everyone is still dealing with the repercussions of that. And I want to be clear, though, despite saying that, there is no overarching plot to this story. It's all character work. It's all just us living alongside these people as they face the challenges of their lives. And when I talk about these books, when I talk about Becky Chambers' writing, I think that the important thing for me, the word that I just keep coming back to, is that Becky Chambers' writing is kind. Her universe has conflicts. The people have conflicts within themselves. They have conflicts in the world around them, and bad things do happen. But you as the reader are brought along on this journey as a friend, and that's the best way I could describe it. I think the thing that the Wayfarers series and Record of a Spaceborne Few exemplify for me is the thing that I think science fiction does best, which is giving us a glimpse of ourselves through this fantastic lens. And I simply love this book. I cannot recommend it enough. 5 out of 5 stars. Record of a Spaceborne Few by Becky Chambers. The next book I read this month is The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mickey Brommer, and I'm certain I'm mispronouncing that. I apologize. I learned about this book from another booktube channel, Reading with Meg, and she very much highly recommended it. She said that it was a 5-star read for her. This is a lit fic story about a woman, Clover, who is a death doula. She helps dying people face the end of their lives with dignity and helps them to get their affairs in order in a personal way, not really a legal or financial way or anything like that. And because of this profession and some other decisions that she's made, she's a very lonely woman, and she has isolated herself in some ways because she doesn't trust the living the same way that she trusts the dying. And this situation sets up a new client who helps Clover as much as Clover helps her. Very typical sort of thing in stories. But Claudia is this dying woman who regrets a particular turning point in her life when she made the decision to leave behind a budding career as a young female photojournalist in 1956 and to go home and to be an upper crust New York society wife, and the kind of wife and mother that was expected of women of her social standing and at that time. And so in many ways the story is as much hers, is as much Claudia's as it is Clover's, and I really enjoyed going along with these two women on the ride. And this book it's sad and it's sweet and it's full of grief and it's full of regrets, but it's also really hopeful and heartfelt. And personally, I cried on page 4. I was sitting in a public place just starting this book, and page 4 I started crying. So that tells you a lot. But it's not a perfect novel. It is the author's debut novel, and I think sometimes that shows. Towards the end of the book, the story starts to feel rushed in ways that it didn't need to. There's also a romance in the story that is a little too on the nose for my liking. I think my major gripe with the story, though, is that very often while I was reading it, I found myself having this feeling like the story was saying, lonely introvert type character is sad, and lonely introvert type character needs loud extrovert type character to save them from themselves. And though that's not where the story ends up, it was a vibe that was so pervasive through the story that it constantly affected me and honestly made me anxious while I was reading the story. And I think that what carries this book for me is how much I like Clover, how much I feel for Clover, because I understand her loneliness, and her loneliness really spoke to me and where I am in my life right now. In the end, I'm incredibly happy that I read this. I will definitely read more from Mickey Brommer if she puts anything else out. And yeah, in the end, I'm very happy to have read it. So, 4 out of 5 stars, The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mickey Brommer. My final novel that I read this month, and I have saved the best for last. This is A Restless Truth by Freya Marsk. This book is the second book in a trilogy, and I want you to know that I didn't know that when I started reading it. I just jumped right in without any idea that I was reading the second book in a trilogy. And the good news is it doesn't matter. Even though this is clearly connected to the first book, you will be up to speed and on your way, and you will never feel lost when you get into this book. This book is equal parts mystery and romance. Despite that, it lives on the fantasy shelves in my Barnes & Noble, so I do not really understand how books get classified. Oh well, that's where you'll find it if you go looking for it. So picture this. It's the 1910s, and the story takes place on a luxury ocean liner from the White Star Line. Think the Titanic in its heyday. And it's crossing the Atlantic from New York to England. And our two viewpoint characters are two young English society women. The first is Maud Blythe, and she is on her first solo trip. And she's acting as the companion to an elderly woman who is coming home to England after living in the United States for many, many, many years. And the second viewpoint character is a woman named Violet Debenham, who is also a English society woman, but she ran away from England to get away from her family after involving herself in a self-inflicted scandal. And for the last several years, she has been living in New York as an actress in a somewhat scandalous theater. On their first day out to sea, there's a murder. So now Maud and Violet have 6 days to find the murderer, recover stolen property, and hopefully not get themselves killed in the bargain. The thing I haven't told you yet is that there's also a secret society of magicians who are involved in this plot up to their necks. And magic is real in this world, but it's hidden from society at large. And honestly, it's not the most important aspect of the story, because even though magic drives the plot of the story, what really matters in this story is the interactions between Violet and Maud. So the adventure that these two go on is also the backdrop to a budding romance between them that is just very steamy and very real and heartfelt. And I don't really have the words to describe it, because for me, it was just perfect. And I know that I hear a lot of other people talk about how they don't like insta-love, or they don't like when two characters come together too quickly, and how they need this yearning and desire between characters. And somehow this book gives you a 6-day romance that is so chock full of yearning and longing and desire, and like, it is perfect for me. I loved it. So I think it's also something that this book had going for it is that Maud immediately has become one of my favorite characters I've ever read about. I absolutely love her. She's wonderful. I don't want to say too much about the plot or the action of this book, because I kind of want you to read it for yourself. Let me just say that my margin notes throughout this book, every time I would underline something or highlight something that I wanted to remember for later, my margin notes just keep saying, I love this book, over and over and over again. The cast of characters is absolutely brilliant. The writing is deft and skillful. The romance is just literal perfection. And the world building, again, is so strong that I started in the middle of a trilogy and I never felt lost or confused. So 6 out of 5 stars, just amazing. I absolutely loved this book. I wanted to read it again the minute that I finished it. That's how much I love this book. And so highly recommend it. A Restless Truth by Freya Marsk. Okay, so that's all for the books that I read this month. I want to briefly touch on a few other things before I go, but I won't spend much time on them. Like many people in August, I went to see Deadpool and Wolverine. I loved it, and that got me on a little bit of a superhero kick. So I picked up on Amazon the first 2 volumes of the X-Men Marvel Masterworks, which collects the first 21 issues of the original 1960s X-Men comics into 2 sort of graphic novel forms, just so you can read them all together. And I get that they are the basis of everything that we get later with the X-Men, and that's great, but they are very much of their time, and I struggled with reading them. Women do not get much respect in early Marvel comics, and there's a lot of sort of questionable behavior by the teenagers, more than just the fact that they're teenage superheroes. And I think I'm just going to leave it there. I just want to say that they are very much of their time, so know that going into them, and just sort of be prepared for the fact that even though you may love the X-Men, you may not recognize these X-Men. Also, on that superhero kick, and because I'm trying to reinvigorate my love of gaming alongside of my love of reading, I actually picked up the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game, and this is the core book. And I picked up the X-Men expansion, which is a source book which talks more about the X-teams and the characters and powers that are sort of really special to them. I won't talk about them too much. I just want to say that superhero role-playing games have always had a really kind of special place in my heart, and there's something I've always enjoyed reading, and they're always fun. Even if they're not something you think you're going to run or play, they just are fun to read, because just like this system, they're always quirky and charming, and this system is both. It is quirky and charming, with some potential pitfalls that you'll run into as someone who's going to want to run it or play it. But I think that the strength of this system is that it's easy to learn, it's easy to teach. Everything that's in the core mechanics are really simple. All of the powers are very easy to learn. And I think that it would be amazing for one-shots or convention games or short campaigns. And I think that it does a lot of things really well, even discounting the things that maybe it isn't perfect in. So overall, I would really recommend giving it a read if you're into that sort of thing. And if you just really like the X-Men expansion is something that does a great job of talking about the history of the teams, and just gives you a lot of material to chew on and sink your teeth into. So highly recommend them. They were a lot of fun, and that is the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game. So that wraps up August for me. If you've read any of these books, or if you think any of them sound interesting, I'd love it if you talk to me in the comments. And if you have any suggestions for books like any of these, I would love to read more things that felt like the books that I read this month. So I'd love if you'd mention some of those in the comments for me. And other than that, please be good to each other, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.